Hello and welcome to this video. Is Pink Floyd progressive rock? That is the question of this video. Now, I've done a video like this a few years back, so why would I want to come back and revisit this again? Well, there's two reasons. The first reason is that I spent a week trying to work out what the greatest album of all time was. And I have to be honest, once I'd gone through that process of thinking about it and going through every single criteria that measures a great album, it became undeniable to me that the greatest album of all time objectively is Dark Side of the Moon. I want to talk about that on this video a little bit. The fact that even though I've been quite critical of Pink Floyd, it is my opinion that the greatest album ever made, is Dark Side of the Moon. That's interesting, that is. And I'm quite proud of the fact that it's a progressive rock album. It proves to me an aspect of rock music that the critics malign, but is there in evidence. That one of the biggest selling, one of the most complex, one of the most emotive, one of the most imaginative use of the album and the album artwork of the recording studio, all those things come together at its strongest and most powerful on the album Dark Side of the Moon. I absolutely love that album myself. It's on my list of albums. I have a list of albums that aren't necessarily prog or jazz rock. The music I like: Mahavishnu Orchestra, Frank Zappa, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Alan Holdsworth. In that realm, that is what I listen to. I'm listening to that all day long. But there's a couple of albums, I'd say a couple, there's quite a few albums which don't really belong in that bracket, but I listen to them twice a year. They go in the car. Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden would be one of those. Virtually all the AC/DC albums up to Back in Black, from Let There Be Rock to Back in Black. Actually, High Voltage has now popped in as well. I love that album. So any AC/DC album, those albums will go in the car and they're not coming out for like a week, 2 weeks, as I just play the album round and round because I absolutely love it. And Dark Side of the Moon is one of those albums I never grow tired of it. It's an incredible album. I think it's the best album ever made. But what also has piqued my interest, this is why I'm doing this video now, off the cuff. I was going to do a video about Pat Metheny, but I haven't. I've sat down to do this instead after some thoughts I was just having in the car. Obviously, a few weeks ago, I did a video on Rick Beato and the copyright problems he's having. And I was thinking, the one thing that I should be able to nick is a bit of video from Rick Beato, especially as he dropped a comment on my channel the other day and got in touch and said he likes the channel. So we know he likes the channel. There's a little bit of a rapport that's built up now, I hope, between me and Rick, which I'm very proud of. I am very proud and honoured by the fact that this crappy little YouTube is of interest to one of the great music YouTubers out there. But I will stop the crawling and I will get on with the meat and potatoes of this. Rick did his second interview with Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd. Now, I watched the first one and I have to be honest, although it was very interesting, I found Dave Gilmour a little bit stuffy. And I thought it supported my idea that all the fans and everybody in Pink Floyd and Dave Gilmour and Roger Waters, they think so highly of themselves that it sticks in my throat a little bit. Because yes, they made some great albums, but they've also made some terrible albums. And their sort of quality consistency across the whole discography isn't that great. And I think the fans say it's great when it's done. Anyway, I've done a whole video on this. I've ranked all the Pink Floyd albums. I've done all this. Right, but I keep coming back to it. So there's obviously something compelling for me about Pink Floyd, and there is. Now, Mr. Beato has stayed in contact with Dave Gilmour. They have built a rapport up. This subtext of this video is the idea of the rapport. Because watching Dave on this second interview, He was funny. He was self-critical. He was sat in his studio playing guitar, showing things, going through what he did. He was a completely different person, and I thought he trusts Rick. Rick's done an incredible thing of taking one of the greatest musicians out there, you know, one of the great instrumentalists, and he has built a rapport up with them. Dave respects Rick because Rick can really play and knows his stuff. And Rick respects Dave Gilmour because he's a monster guitar player. Now, I've taken the mickey out of Dave Gilmour over the years, and I've done my old, said, he's built a career on doing this, and the has become a staple of this channel, and there's people who'll go, oh, Andy hasn't even done the Dave Gilmour this week at all. And so I've done it today, and there's a whole contingent who watch this channel that are now going, oh, yes, Andy's done it. I'll do it one more for you. So, and if you stay to the end, there'll be one more, and that will be the best one. Absolutely the best one. So anyway, I sat down there to watch it. Dave Gilmour's there, multi-millionaire, in his big studio, half a moustache. I don't get that. Am I the only person to mention he's got half a moustache? I would have thought with his vast amount of wealth, he could afford to have a whole moustache. I mean, I could have a whole moustache. Maybe if he can't grow a whole moustache, then surely there is some sort of process that someone of his wealth can go through. Or maybe he doesn't mind it. Maybe he doesn't mind having a half a moustache. In fact, I respect him for having it, really. Because it shows that he's not after perfection, which is a value that I hold very highly, as you know. But let's not get in to the esoteric aspects of Dave Gilmour's moustache, because this is veering away to being silly, and I don't want this video to be silly. It's hard for me nowadays to keep on the straight and narrow and not take the path that is pointing to Sillyville. Let's not go to Sillyville today, Andy. Let's get back on the track. I don't even remember what I was talking about now. So, yes, I am now going to show a bit of Rick's video.
Would you say that song is a progressive rock song? Did you guys even talk about style back then?
No, we didn't talk about style, and I've never talked about progressive rock or thought that we were whatever progressive rock is.
Like, what is that, right?
Well, I mean, to me, progressive rock is very, very serious players who can really do their stuff. The wonderful Steve Howe, lovely guy, lovely guitar player. But I'd never thought of us in those terms at all.
People used to say, though, oh, Pink Floyd is kind of they're a progressive rock band. And I thought, yeah, interesting. They're progressive in that they have some songs like Dogs that are really unusual chord progressions, and they have songs that are in odd time signatures.
Yeah.
And they have songs that are really have long arrangements.
Yeah, but I think we were doing it long before the term progressive rock.
That's right.
And I think I was probably a grumpy old man in my 20s, sort of, nah, that's not us. And the whole idea of labeling, it's become more essential in this day and age, but I'm not keen on it.
And if anyone comes along, including him, and says you can't have that, well, Rick, you can't say that when you've argued about copyright in the way that you have. So I'm going to do it anyway. So here's a little bit of that video. Right, so I'm sat there. Dave Gilmour, he never said this on the first video. Rick Beato suddenly starts talking about progressive rock. Suddenly he is saying, was Pink Floyd progressive rock? I think he's in my territory now. This is the sort of thing I do. I've already done this video. Is Pink Floyd progressive rock? But of course I ain't got bloody Dave Gilmour there, have I? Oh, hang on. Bloody hell. Hello? Hello, Dave. God, yes, I was just talking about you. I can't believe it. How are you, mate? Yeah. I watched it last night. I thought it was good. Yeah, you came off better on that. You're more relaxed. Yeah. Well, he's a nice bloke, isn't he, old Rick? Yeah. Really? Well, look, the thing is, I know. It's done out of affection. When I go, wee, 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 that's done out of affection, that is. You do though, Dave. You do make that sound quite a lot. No. If it wasn't true, then people would laugh. They'd just go, why has Andy made that sound? Why has he made that abstract sound? The reason they laugh is because it sounds like you're good. Yeah. I can't just forget it. Yeah. Yeah, I'll stop going on about the moustache, yeah. Yeah. I know. I get the same thing. I've recently had a shave, right? Yeah, and I'd grown quite a sizable goatee. I can grow a proper moustache, Dave, you know. I might not have your millions or your touch on the guitar, but I can grow a full moustache, yeah. Yeah, so anyway, I shaved it off and I've had a few messages saying I look better with it. Yeah, I know. That's the problem, isn't it? When you get to a certain age, and I'm nowhere near your vast age, Mr. Gilmour, but when you get to a certain age, what I've found is that if you shave it off, you look younger, but if you have it, you look better. It's the better younger dynamic. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Women do have it. Women have it, yeah. They have that thing that if they go to the gym and they go on a diet and they get thin, then they look like Gollum. But if they don't do that, then they look a bit, you know, chubby. Yeah. Yeah, we all like a big boned woman. Yes, of course we do. I'm glad to know you do, Dave. Yes, that's good. Yeah. You never said this on the Rick Beato interview, did you? You never went into that, you know. That's an interesting point, that me pretending I'm talking to you on this phone and making out that you're saying these things could be slander, I suppose. You could sue me, but I've added this bit in here that if I ever went to court, I'll go, it's obvious it's a joke and I am actually talking to myself and you're not on the phone. I know some people will think it's true, but they're stupid. Yeah. All right, mate. Yeah, I will stop going on them about the moustache and I will stop going, even though they love it and I get extra views and they go, I didn't want to subscribe, but I'll subscribe now. Yeah. Yeah, I know you got to make a living, haven't you? You know. Yeah. All right, Dave. Yeah. All right, mate. Yeah. I will. Love you, mate. Love you. Dave Gilmour. Can't believe it. See, it's not just Rick that has the older Dave Gilmours on the channel. I've got him on as well. And I've had Jimi Hendrix on, Charlie Christian on. Who else have I had on? A whole host of people. Can't remember. Robert Plant's been on my... I can have whoever I want on now. Because I've created this, the rock and roll telephone. That, you know, I can reach his past time and space. I can go to any era. I can ring up Beethoven on that. Do you want me to ring up Beethoven? I'll show you how it works. If you want to ring up somebody on old phones, for people who are young, this is a telephone for those of you young. It's got letters, right? So I'll ring up Beethoven. You don't think I can, do you? You think it's just made up, don't you? So what you do is you go B, E, T, H, O, V, E. Is this entertaining for you? N. There we go. Hello. Yeah. Is that Beethoven's residence? Yes. This is Andy Edwards, YouTuber, the 21st century. Yes. Yeah, 21st century. Yeah. Yeah. Well. Okay. Can I speak to Beethoven, please? Okay. He's coming. Beethoven's coming now. Hello? I just got a load of random barking. All I got was woofs. Bloody hell. It does work though. It doesn't prove anything, does it? So, 15 minutes in, a lot of silliness. Is Pink Floyd prog? Sit back and I will give you my opinion. Rock music, as opposed to rock and roll, goes along with the cultural shift that happens in the 1960s. A generation that had come up post-war looked at the generation that had gone before. They'd been probably born in the sort of wake of the war. They wanted a different world. They had this sort of utopian idea, and they didn't want to follow the footsteps of their parents. They started to reach for all sorts of things. Elvis Presley is an example of the exact things that their parents hated embodied in every shape or form. And very soon society came along and basically clipped Elvis's wings. And in that vacuum of the sort of rock and roll superstar, the sort of Mount Olympus of, rock and roll stars, emerges something else. I see the sort of the clipping of Elvis's wings as creating, in a way, musicians like Bob Dylan, who make, popular music, rock and roll, rhythm and blues, folk music, whatever you want to call it, serious. And this happens as the albums developed, and the album becomes the vehicle for a time of that generation and their want not to be like their parents. The album is intelligent. Bob Dylan's great gift to rock and roll is to make it intelligent. Stop just singing the songs about riding along in my automobile. So this happens with the evolution of the album. The British take American rhythm and blues and they chuck it back at them. Undeniably, the greatest band that did this was the Beatles. And they did it early on and they took it back to America. And a cross-fertilization comes over. And if you take Dylan and the Beatles, that creates, in 65, I would say, the beginnings of what could be called the progressive rock era or the album era. And this is where self-respecting utopian young people in the 1960s would show as an emblem of what they want in the future. They would show it by not only owning but carrying around albums with them. They would have a certain album, and I've been told this by people that were in the 1960s, that you would go downtown and you would walk around holding your album. The album could be a Dylan album, it could have been a Beatles album, it could be a Wes Montgomery album, it could have been all sorts of different albums, and people start to make albums to fulfill that. Progressive rock actually starts with Bob Dylan in a way, and it's Bob Dylan's vision and the subject matter of what he's singing about. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Dylan, as you know, but I think there's a tune called Desolation Row, is it? That's an epic. It's an epic. This informs bands, and the album as a sort of art form, which it goes beyond just simple pop songs, starts to emerge. Pink Floyd are around at 65, very early on. They're around and about, right? They are probably one of the first bands in the UK to be formed in this bubble that is coming in the wake of what I've just described. I've used wake twice now in this, and I never normally use the word wake. There's 3 times. 4 times, actually, if you consider the fact that I just mentioned wake before. Anyway, just keep going, Andy. So, in that wake, Pink Floyd are one of the first bands that are following this muse, all right? Yes, they're writing pop songs with Syd Barrett, but they're also creating happenings. I would put the Grateful Dead perhaps in there, and a few of the sort of psychedelic bands in America. I would probably say Love is there, but none of them have the sort of avant-garde sweep of our British psychedelic bands. Pink Floyd are doing both of these. When Syd Barrett sort of self-destructs after the first album, that's all they've got. And so Pink Floyd keep going by making very uncompromising, improvised sort of electronic psychedelia. What they're doing there is laying the groundwork for a lot of what's going to happen in Europe in the krautrock scene. Pink Floyd are there before, laying the groundwork for that. But in the quirkiness and Englishness of the sort of Syd Barrett end of it, we have the seeds of the British progressive rock. Pink Floyd's importance on the development of progressive rock cannot be overestimated. Now, what Dave says in that little bit when Rick asks him about it that I found quite interesting, he goes, well, we were there before. And they really were. They really were. Now, we have to understand that what we call progressive rock is the outcome of a number of bands that emerged in the wake of this stuff we talk in, the post Jimi Hendrix, Sgt. Pepper bands, King Crimson, Yes, Jethro Tull, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Pink Floyd, Gentle Giant. You know, there's a whole host of bands that emerge in the UK. And the truth is, every single one is doing their own thing. And so when we have the term progressive rock, it's a category, and categories are woolly. We cast our net out over all these different bands out there. Now, the thing that joins, say, ELP, Yes, Genesis, Gentle Giant, King Crimson, is the complexity of the music. Cream, when they emerged, they brought up a level of virtuosity which we didn't expect to see in a rock band. It was almost like jazz level virtuosity. And because of that door opening, then classical musicians were able to come in, people like Rick Wakeman or Keith Emerson, people who had had a training in that area. And so the virtuosity level goes up, and they start making music feeling that like they're sort of, you know, Nietzschean gods at the forefront of music making. They're going to create a new world. You know, young people are they can take great long 20 minutes tracks, you know, about Greek mythology. They can take all this, and they see themselves as almost like Apollonian in their outlook. And these bands make incredibly complex music. And the point I make is that this is a time when high culture met with low populist culture. It's an incredible thing. On the album, millions of people did it. Now, I think with Pink Floyd is they start doing what they do. And of all the progressive rock bands, they take a while to get there, but they all do to a certain extent, except for King Crimson. King Crimson come out in 69 in the Court of the Crimson King, and on a couple of tracks on there, they've nailed it. They're there already. Yes isn't. Yes, sound like a sort of souped up jazzy Beatles stroke, you know, the Byrds. That's what they sound like in the early days. Jethro Tull is a blues band. They're an out and out blues band. Gentle Giant are actually the Simon Dupree thing, and they're a pop band. None of these are progressive rock bands. They all sort of coalesce around their sounds. ELP, the Nice were doing this early on. Nice were another band that you can almost, Soft Machine and Nice and Pink Floyd, we can see those, and the Moody Blues. God, it sounds like the Spanish Inquisition, this does. There's other bands earlier on, but what they're doing is different. Moody Blues, are they progressive rock? You know, is Soft Machine progressive rock? This is a banner that was wider in the late 60s, early 70s than it is now. It has been defined by the success of bands like Yes and Genesis. That has defined what Pink prog is. Pink Floyd's journey is different. They are taking a long time to get to their sound. We'll get to that in a minute. So ELP, they corner the market of rock musicians, high-powered rock musicians playing like classical music. And they do that by replacing the guitar with the keyboard. Keith Emerson is both virtuoso classical keyboardist and Jimi Hendrix of the Hammond organ. So you can do both, and they don't need a guitar player. That's what they do. Yes, have this sort of impressionistic, symphonic approach to their music. They are creating as a whole, through improvisation, these great big slabs of very orchestrated music around these incredibly beautiful but brief songs by John Anderson. And John Anderson's very important. He has a vision of a certain type of sound, which is what, yes, we could call it symphonic. Genesis are quirky and weird. They are like the sort of Edward Lear or Lewis Carroll of rock music at the time. They're making quirky, weird English music. Gentle Giants are a little bit like that, but they have a more sort of postmodernist approach to what they're doing. They're big fans of R.D. Laing, the psychologist. And so there's something harder than Genesis with Gentle Giant. There's something more psychological. There's something more existential, I believe, with them. Very, very complex. So my point is every single progressive rock band, when you actually look at them, are doing their own thing. Gong are doing their own thing. Every single one, Hatfield and the North, are doing their own thing. I think that the net that was cast across progressive rock in later years was made by people who appreciated the virtuosity of this, the virtuosity in the playing and the virtuosity in the compositions. And so with that, and then Dave Gilmour makes this very apparent because he says he's not Steve Howe. Steve Howe is a guitarist that can play classical guitar, English folk guitar, American folk guitar. He can play flamenco. He can play slide guitar. He can play electric guitar. He can play jazz. He can play blues. He can even play pedal steel guitar. He is an incredible player that brings all that to the mix. Rick Wakeman's the same. Bruford's the same. That's what they are. To be quite honest, the argument that progressive rock fans who don't think Pink Floyd are progressive, the argument is always made one about virtuosity. They're not that type of players. And Dave Gilmour almost says that. Now, let's look at it from Dave Gilmour's point of view, right? He's not in Pink Floyd in the early days. He's mates with Syd Barrett, I believe. He's not in the band. The band forms. He misses out on the band being formed, going to Abbey Road, doing their debut album. He gets drafted in when Syd's going wobbly. And thank God, because actually in Richard Wright, Nick Mason and Roger Waters, there is a strong instrumentalist. I'm not saying they're not good players. Richard Wright seems to have a certain touch on keyboards and interest in jazz chord progressions, which, is important. Roger Waters eventually becomes their sort of visionary, but he's not a particularly great bass player. Nick Mason is not a virtuoso drummer in the same realm as a Phil Collins or Barrymore Barlow or a Bill Bruford, but he has a touch on the drums. They all have a touch, but they don't have that great instrumentalist. And Pink Floyd could not have taken into their band a Steve Hackett or a Steve Howe. Dave Gilmour's perfect. He's a great instrumentalist. He's able to weave absolute magic on his guitar. And that's because he's come out of the blues, but he doesn't stick to the blues. In terms of his chords and his chord progressions, he is not of the blues. I find that very interesting, okay? By the mid-70s, he has proved himself to be one of the great instrumentalists. And there's a whole army of people that absolutely adore him. On this channel, I'm a little bit of a iconoclast, and I like to poke fun, not at Dave Gilmour, actually. It's the fans who think he is now the greatest guitarist of all time. And Rick Beato could see the same thing, and he coined a thing called the Gilmour effect, which is whenever someone like me or him posts or talk about any guitarist like Al Di Meola or John McLaughlin or Alan Holdsworth, anybody who's fast and technical and speedy, people will go, there's no emotion there, check out Dave Gilmour. That's what we call the Gilmour effect. So it's very interesting that Rick, with that interest, has ended up now having David Gilmour twice on his channel. It's weird the way that works. So I think that the point I'm making here is, to each of those bands, none of those bands probably think they're progressive rock. They're aware of the genre. But I can remember watching an interview with Phil Collins when someone interviewed him and asked him about punk. And he said, when punk came along, he looked around and he was going, oh, this is great. This is what we need to get back to some visceral rock and roll. Yeah, they're bloody all pretentious, aren't they? Yes, and ELP, they're all... And he didn't realise that his band was being included in the same bracket. Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull approaches the whole progressive rock thing as almost like a lampoon, a satire on it. I think the true progressive rock band is Yes. I always have done. They're the greatest. So it is sort of their genre. So I can understand. And another one is, it's like when I was playing with Robert Plant. I would chat to Robert Plant about bands like Black Sabbath and Deep Purple. He didn't see Led Zeppelin as being in that category whatsoever. He was surprised if I mentioned Zeppelin in the same breath as Deep Purple. He was surprised because to him, in his band, he was doing something else. To Dave Gilmour, he'll seem like he's doing something else. So we have a phenomenon where you've got a whole fan base in progressive rock that is only going to let it be called progressive rock if it sounds like Genesis, or Peter Gabriel Genesis, that is. We have the band themselves going, well, we're not prog, we were doing something else. Why have we been pulled into this prog bracket? We were trying to do something else. So with that, you would have thought, Andy, why do you think they are prog? And I would say this because it's to do with the album. I think progressive rock is basically, it's rock music that you sit down to listen to. You expect to have an experience which is more than just the visceral. It's about taking people on a journey that lasts more than 2.5 minutes. It's utilising all the technologies that are there. So the utilisation of technology makes you progressive rock. That's the first thing. The second thing is doing long form music, which is, I don't want to use the word classical, but is structurally similar to the way classical music is made. So Miles Davis doing a sidelong Pharaoh's dance on Bitches Brew is not prog because it's improvised. It does have formal sort of structures in it, but it's not the same as the sort of what has been borrowed by the progressive rock musicians to create these long form compositions. So technology, long form compositions. A level of virtuosity and execution of music which is hard and difficult to play. That will be another one I will put in there. Not actually being a genre. The genre being they bring together all these different genres. You can almost like have multitude of genres in your style. I feel this is what makes Frank Zappa progressive. I think the ELP would jump style a lot. Yes, not so much. Genesis a little bit more. King Crimson a little bit more. But there's an idea of genre hopping. You know, you can do whatever you want in this. The use of improvisation structurally in tunes, that's another thing that I would borrow from jazz. And the esoteric one for me, which is the embedding of the English aesthetic, a quirky surrealness, a homemadeness, a sort of wanting to pull down to, figures of authority, but also a literariness that comes from the English literary tradition, a sort of based in a sort of almost like Victorian worldview. All of those things make you progressive rock, I think. Now, every single progressive rock band, if we were to tick those off, we would find they wouldn't have them all. Now, what Pink Floyd doesn't have is that virtuoso element. But the use of technology in the studio to create songs, yes. The creation of long-form compositions, yes. The genre hopping, yes. The English aesthetic, yes. The absurdism, yes. The sort of rooted in the English literary tradition, yes. All that's in there. Now, what happens with Pink Floyd, I think, which is something that I have realised doing this channel, is they're posh boys, they're middle-class boys. A lot of these progressive rock bands have a sort of middle-class work ethic. They get down and do it, right? They keep at it. There's a lot made about these bands where people say, oh, the labels would give you 4 or 5, albums, before to find your sound. But by the same token, the bands would also not disintegrate in a puddle of drug taking. They put their head down and did the work. The one thing that joins, Genesis and Pink Floyd all together is the bloody work ethic. They're in the studio for hours, working with some producer, putting all these little bits down and then chopping this tape up to create these incredible... They didn't need to do that. They could have just written, gone in there, written a song and banged it out. So there's a certain approach. Pink Floyd decide to keep going. When Sid's gone, they decide to keep going. And they haven't got a direction. They haven't really got a lead singer. They haven't got a songwriter. They haven't really got any songs. They try and write songs. But a lot of their songs sound like, when Andy Summers or Stuart Copeland write songs in The Police. They've written a song, but it's a bit strange. They get by doing a lot of film soundtracks, a lot of electronic improvisation. Their live shows are probably, a lot of people getting stoned and watching some incredible light show and lots of trippy sounds going on. But slowly they start to form something. And I feel that the first real masterpiece is Atom Heart Mother, which is really down to the big sidelong epic Atom Heart Mother. This is 1970. And with that track, they really start to understand how the studio works and how you can create these long form compositions, jumping through all these different genres, utilizing a sort of more modern classical approach, but that classical influence is in there. That's a massive breakthrough. By the time they do Echoes, they've consolidated their sounds. Echo is a long track. It uses sort of classical, forms to extend it, with things being repeated, going back to certain themes and all that type of stuff. A beautiful tune and one of their high points. I also class Pink Floyd live at Pompeii as an utter high point. That consolidates and brings together the best of what they've done at that point. And when it's presented like that, you go, God, there's some really good diamonds in the rough throughout all those earlier albums. Obscured by Clouds, made very quickly, consolidating it down to songs. Roger Waters starts to emerge as the primary songwriter. He has a certain vision, which is rooted in a sort of existential view of the world, combined with a sort of his Marxist upbringing, British Marxism we've got in there. And I think it all comes together. The balance between the personalities, everything comes together in Dark Side of the Moon. Now, when you look at the trajectory of progressive rock and the album, there is a high point in 1972. It's the high point is close to the edge, but so many progressive rock bands have suddenly understood what they're doing and they are branching out. And in 72, you have this feeling of massive exploration. What can be done? Thick as a brick, all these albums. What can be done? Three Friends by Gentle Giant. What can be done with this form? How far can we put it out? And it works, and they actually sell millions of records doing all this weird stuff. And so they all go for it in 1973. They all go for it. You get Tales from Topographic Open, Tubular Bells emerges, a whole bunch of things come out in that year. Selling England by the Pound. It's a rich year. That is the mountain peak of progressive rock, 73. Now, Pink Floyd are lucky enough to hit their stride in 1973. I think if they made Dark Side of the Moon in 1971 or 1977, it would not have had the effect. Everybody was buying into what I think fundamentally is progressive rock, which is sit-down rock music. You go and you buy this album, you take it home, you have your hi-fi in your house, you bring your mates round, you open up the gatefold sleeve, you roll your joint up in the gatefold sleeve, and you put it on. And there is nothing like Dark Side of the Moon. Not Tales from Topographic Oceans, not even Tubular Bells. All of those are going to take you on a journey, but not a journey to the dark side like this. This is something else. Okay? After that, 74, 75, the progressive rock musicians themselves know it's over. And I think that then Pink Floyd move into a style which is not really progressive rock. It's what I call dad rock. It's very pretty, nice rock music. There's still the edge because of the lyrics, but Wish You Were Here is a brilliant album. But there's something that is not there. There's a certain grit and experimentation and wildness, avant-gardeness almost, that's in Dark Side of the Moon. All of that's in there. Of course, this album comes out. It becomes one of the biggest selling albums of all time. It goes to the charts. It never leaves. The reason it never leaves is because, unlike most rock music, the next generation come along and they learn about it. What's this album? Dark Side of the Moon. Oh, my God. I'm a big fan of the book The Outsider by Colin Wilson. I've mentioned this a number of times on the channel. That's a book that has the same thing. It's like you approach it with caution. It's not a work of high art. It's not rubbish. It's something else. Colin Wilson's something else. But you're in the club, and when you read that book, it's going to blow your mind. It blew my mind. Took me on a journey when I'm here talking to you because of that. Dark Side of the Moon is like that, especially for people who are not listening to all the wild and weird music we listen to. For that reason, I think if we look at what makes a great album, if we look at the performance, the use of the recording studio, the concept behind it, the popularity of it, the incredible beauty of the compositions, everything, the artwork, if we measure an album like that, Dark Side of the Moon comes out right on top. It is the greatest album ever made. Now, when Rolling Stone did their list, it wasn't even in the top 20. Now, you know why? I tell you why. It's because the critics don't like progressive rock. And that, for me, is the evidence that this is a progressive rock album. If this was slightly different and it'd been made by Neil Young or Velvet Underground or maybe the Stooges, not that they are capable of making an album of this greatness, but if it had been made by one of those characters, they would be lauding it in the same way as they're lauding, say, Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds is nothing compared to Dark Side of the Moon. Whatever you say that makes Pet Sounds great, Dark Side of the Moon do this in bucket loads. Now you can say, yeah, well, it's obviously was a good few years, you know, it's like how many years earlier, 7 years later. It's only 7 years. This is the summation of the album. Pet Sounds may have played a part of laying the groundwork for the album. I'm sure that's the case. I think that Pink Floyd are progressive rock. I think there's enough there to cast that net around. I'm quite aware that this as a category is spongy and we shouldn't really put music into boxes. It doesn't do any good. Dave Gilmour makes that point as well in the interview, and that's correct. But for the music to be marketed, for it to find an audience, for young people to discover new music, we have to have genres. We have to have styles. And I think the idea that some intelligent, bookish kid, a little bit of an outsider, you know, who's perhaps just bought into Rush and realises Rush is part of this genre known as progressive rock, and they get a list of bands and they discover there's a band called Pink Floyd that made an album called Dark Side of the Moon, and Andy Edwards said it was the greatest album ever made. I don't think they're going to be let down when they buy that and go sat there thinking, this isn't a progressive rock, I don't like this. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. Pink Floyd is progressive rock. Even if you don't agree with me, I hope this video has entertained you in a way with the comedy stuff at the start and the more serious discussion of music at that time. And please realise the reason why I do this is because the mainstream cultural story of these bands is even a band as huge and as talented as Pink Floyd do not get the credit they deserve. The Stones, the Beatles will always be mentioned, never Pink Floyd. And this is one of the biggest bands of all time with a huge fan base. And all from a guy that can't grow a full moustache. But I tell you one thing he can do, old Dave Gilmour, he can do this. He's not listening. I went too far then. I can't push it further out. It is what it is. If you like this video, put a like on it. If you want to see some more, subscribe. If you want to support me, you can become a Patreon. The links are all down below. You can become a free member over at Patreon, or you can be a paid up member over at Patreon. You can also be a member of this channel and get to see video content exclusive for you and get to see all my videos earlier and whatever else that you get from being a member of the channel. I also have a PayPal tip jar, and I thank you very much when you put a tip in. And it's actually, as much as the money's great, people will put little messages in, and I'll have done a video and I feel like I've done a good job, and then somebody will drop me a reasonable amount of cash, really, a really nice tip, and then I'll go, this is for so-and-so video, and I am so indebted. I don't normally mention the people who go on it and put the money in, but I have to mention Martin, who has put so many healthy donations in. Martin, I thank you so much. I do really appreciate it. I do notice it, and I'm never too sure how to show it, but you have had a shout out on the channel. You know exactly who you are, Martin. So, end of the video. Hope you enjoyed that. See you on the next one.